Hello and welcome to Global Order. My name is Ishan Dhar. In May 2025, India and Pakistan fought a brief but intense 4-day air war unlike anything the world has seen before. While no fighter jets crossed borders, missiles, drones, and long range air to air weapons brought the future of air combat to each nation's doorstep. Joining me today is Dr. Peter Layton of the Griffith University and Australian Defence Force, who published an analysis in Airspace titled The 4-Day Near Peer Air War. His analysis breaks down exactly what happened, how India achieved its objectives, why Pakistan struggled to defend its air bases, and what this conflict tells us about the next generation of warfare. It's a rare look at how modern air power actually works in a high stakes environment and what India must prepare for next. Stay tuned, for this conversation with Dr. Peter Layton is going to be a fascinating one. Dr. Layton, thank you very much for your time and joining us here at Global Order. We eagerly look forward to your insights.
Great to be here.
Now, Dr. Layton, you did talk about India meeting its initial objectives about targeting 9 terrorist camps. Before we get into what India did right in terms of the air defense, why don't we focus on what went wrong initially for India on May 7th, the night of May 7th, when you talk about when the two crewed air forces went at it.
Okay.
What exactly, in your opinion, went wrong over there?
Okay. So when I said we're talking at a couple of different levels here, I suppose. At the strategic level, the aim was to deter Pakistan from supporting future terrorist attacks.
Correct.
So it's still uncertain whether that has been achieved. That is just an assumption that hopefully that has happened.
Yeah.
But at the operational level, there's certainly been success as far as hitting, as in a number of missiles and bombs, etc., destroying certain facilities inside Pakistan. So it was definitely a well-planned, well-executed attack.
Yeah.
In war, of course, it's always uncertain, and one of the big uncertainties is the intelligence you have about the other side.
Correct.
And it does seem that the big shortcoming was that there was some intelligence lacking about the capabilities of the Pakistani Air Force, and in particular their air defence forces and the use of a long-range Chinese-made missile. Now, we're still, of course, making a few assumptions here. We're assuming that what's being told to us from both the Indian and the Pakistan side is correct. There's not some disinformation.
Right.
But just sort of going upon what has been released so far, at fairly high levels from both sides, it seems that the Indian in intelligence assumed a certain range of the air-to-air missile that Pakistani aircraft fired, and the real range was actually longer. So Indian aircraft thought that they were safe staying on the Indian side of the border, and it turned out they weren't.
And this is the PL-15 missile that you're
the PL-15 missile. And in India's defence, of course, the missile shot that in particular took down the Rafale was one of the longest air-to-air missile shots ever taken. There's another one that was taken in the Ukraine by a Russian aircraft that was about 50 kilometres longer. But this and interception at such a range was unusual. Air forces around the world will have looked at this and they will now realise this is not unusual.
Right. And the other point you raised with regard to the events of the first day, when we talk about the two crewed aircrafts, you brought up the importance of third-party targeting and how that might have played a role. Could you get more into that, please? What precisely does that mean?
Yeah, so third-party targeting relies upon the fact, I suppose, that these days everything's done in the digital world.
Right.
So the ground-based radars or air-based radars on those early warning air and control aircraft, they detect targets at long ranges, at 200 or 300 kilometres away, and they pass that target information onto fighter aircraft, which are closer, and the fighter aircraft that have these air-to-air weapons. and the fighter aircraft then passes that targeting data into their air-to-air missiles. Now, that's actually technically quite hard because the targets, as in other aircraft, are flying at a certain height. They're a long way away, and they're also moving at relatively higher speeds.
Right.
So it's not just a position of where they are now. It is a vector data, and needs to be very accurate because the missile then has a certain time of flight, often of some minutes, and the target will have moved in that intervening period. So generally speaking, the fighter aircraft launching the missile has to update the missile while the missile is in flight, and that updated information originally comes from either that ground-based radar or the airborne warning and control aircraft. So it's quite a complicated kill chain there, and lots of things can go wrong, and previously they have. Again, this was an interesting air war, that this idea, which has been implemented by major air forces over the last 10, 12 years, this is one of those first events where this kill chain has worked and worked well.
Now, given that, as you say, third-party targeting gave the Pakistani Air Force an edge, at least in that particular exchange. Post that exchange, there was a lot of noise in the media about the J-10 versus the Rafale, Chinese-made aircraft versus Western-made platforms. Some of this we later found out, of course, was pushed by the Chinese government. But would you say these analogies and comparisons, I mean, are these really valid given that this might not necessarily be a reflection of the fighter aircrafts at all, at least from a layman's
Yes,
perspective? It seems that way.
that is certainly correct. I mean, it's one of those things that are looking at several different levels. I think over the last 20 years, the focus, if you think about this from a military point of view, the focus has shifted from the platform to the weapon that the platform's firing. But however, in the public domain, it's still perhaps the platform sort of achieves all of the popular press, partially because fighter jets, warships, tanks, etc., are such attractive items for the media and for ministers and for government ministers to say stand beside. So the focus tends to be on the platform. But this is a good example of really wasn't the platform that was as important as the missile fired and that digital kill chain there. It's an interesting question about it was fired by a modern Chinese fighter aircraft. It possibly could have been a 20-year-old aircraft, let's say, if it had that digital kill chain software with it and a good air-to-air missile.
Correct. And do you think India should rethink how it deploys crewed air fighters on its Western Front?
Um, I think, to be honest, they have.
Yeah,
The Indian Air Force was quite fast about realising on the day one that had a serious and unexpected problem here, and quickly, I think, worked out what the problem was. But when we start talking about crewed aircraft, as my previous comment there, I suppose, shows,
yeah,
a lot of the focus or a lot of the stress in, say, military operations now is not on the platform, but on the rockets, missiles, and the
right.
drones. So I think in the use of crewed aircraft in the future will be, if you like, used very cautiously and prudently, and they'll try to keep those aircraft from being lost, and focus on mainly using rockets, missiles, and drones where they can. Bearing in mind and fighter aircraft are a good example. They take 3 or 4 years to build. The production rates are very slow. So if you lose one during a war, you won't get it back until well after the war's finished. So I think there's a military imperative here that modern defence forces focus on the rockets, missiles, and drones that can be replaced when they are used relatively quickly, compared to say 3 or 4 years for a crewed fighter.
And speaking of rockets, missiles, and drones, in the subsequent days, why do you think Pakistan struggled to actually stop Indian missile and drone attacks?
Yes, it's an interesting question, that one. From what was released in the press sort of thing,
Yeah,
I assume it was, if you like, a quantitative difference. I was quite impressed that the Indian Defence Forces deployed a large number of short-range, low-altitude surface-to-air missiles
right,
and a large number of anti-aircraft guns. I think 1,000 were mentioned in the press.
right.
Now, it seemed that Pakistan did not have the same scale. I think it's a big point when you start talking about the use of these uncrewed systems, rockets, missiles, drones,
Right.
that attacks can involve a large number of them. In which case, to defend yourself requires a large number of the defensive systems as well. So there's a delicate interplay there. Sort of both sides have to have numbers, and I don't think Pakistan had sufficient numbers. I imagine they're working on that now.
And when you look at India's air defenses and how they perform, did they exceed expectations from your point of view?
Yes, I think they did. They exceeded in their effectiveness as far as numbers of rockets, missiles, drones launched, and the numbers which were intercepted. I mean, it's interesting. An interesting thing here, of course, is that while you may build up a large defensive force to shoot down such systems, you really won't know what the sort of how they will perform until the day. And we also have the issue of both sides use electronic warfare extensively.
Right.
Now, it is possible that the Indian electronic warfare worked quite effectively against the Pakistani defensive systems, but the Pakistani electronic warfare was less effective against the Indian systems. So we get back to that sort of mass, but also the smartness of your electronic warfare as well.
Right, and I guess it would be worth bringing this up here as well, given President Putin's recent visit to India, and there being a lot of discussion about acquisition of the S-400 system, possibly
Mhm.
joint production of the S-500 systems. What do you know about how the S-400 possibly performed when it came to India's air defense?
Yes, well, and again, that's one of those things that's difficult to sort out the wheat from the chaff too. However, I do notice that the Indian Defence Force has placed an urgent order for I think 300 S-400 missiles.
Right.
So that suggests, firstly, that the missile proved effective, and
Right.
the Indian Defence Force was very impressed with it. And secondly, that they perhaps used a considerable number of them, not perhaps say 300 missiles, because they were there. Because they are doubtlessly building up stockpiles as well. But nonetheless, it's a vote of confidence in the S-400 system. In that regard, I'm perhaps a little surprised by at least the public reporting of the S-400 buy. That makes sense. Talking about getting the Su-57, I mean, I can sort of see where that's coming from, but I'd be cautious if I was the Indian Air Force. I'm sure they are.
Right.
Um, but what surprised me was perhaps is that uh, the big, currently the signature weapon of the Ukrainian war is the Shahed drone. The Iranian drone, if you like, has been refined and improved by the Russians, and if you like, sort of taken the world of the military affairs by storm. Now, that kind of a platform, which is cheap, affordable, and produced in very large numbers, I was almost surprised that the Russians didn't say, we'll set up a factory in India making these for you, because that's an easy technology transfer. I don't know whether you saw, but the Americans have copied the Shahed drone now and are
Right.
producing their version. And certainly the Chinese have produced a version that looks, or produced a drone that looks very similar, but is a lot cheaper, which means they can afford even more. So that kind of low cost system, if you like, does seem to be taking off. So I'm surprised I'm surprised that wasn't mentioned in the Putin talks.
And speaking of the drones, you also discussed the Israeli-made Harop drones, I believe, that were used in this conflict. Do you have any more specifics there of what the performance there might have been like?
No, I don't really. I said though, it's been quite hard to work out. The firstly, sort of what drones are being used and their actual performance is very hard. You can certainly tell that the BrahMos missile and the Scalp missile had certain levels of effect
Right.
because they were carrying large warheads, and the satellite imagery that was provided by a media organisation showed some very big holes, and you wouldn't get big holes in the ground from sort of many of those smaller drone systems.
Right. And in your article, you conclude that India implicitly won the air superiority battle. What does that victory actually look like in a 4-day exchange of war, if you will?
Yeah, it's a victory, if you like, not a classical victory in the sense that you are influencing someone's thinking.
Right.
So the Pakistan Defence Force obviously came to a view that they could not continue the war, or rather the costs of continuing the war exceeded the benefits. And they realised from intellectual level that as the Indian raid on the last night had proven so effective and penetrated their defences so well, that continuing it would mean that they would need to move their expensive aircraft platforms out to the west. So it was a victory, if you like, of the mind. The Indian Defence Force was able to influence the thinking of the Pakistani defence chiefs and convince them that continuing the war, bad idea.
Right. And if there is a subsequent war of such a nature, do you believe there's a single capability as such that will decide air superiority?
Probably not a single one. I'm a big fan of what I call heterogeneous air power, which is a mix of different systems of crude aircraft
Right.
and rockets, missiles, drones, of the uncrewed systems, if you like. Um, so I think it's getting that blend right, which is the hard thing now, and getting that blend is what most sort of major air forces are thinking about. Sort of how do they achieve a mix there, which is the optimum of both the very high tech stuff like the Rafale fighter, electronic warfare, and the mass that you're able to get, the very large numbers from the rockets, missiles, and drones. There is a lot of work going on with counter-defensive systems using lasers and directed energy weapons, and some of those are proving effective, but at the moment they're very short range and they have a lot of tactical difficulties with them, in particular with the environment, whether it's cloudy and it's raining and a whole pile of issues like that. So no one's found a silver bullet so far. That's why I say I think the silver bullet is not a single item, but the optimum mix of a range of systems.
And do you believe now that crewed fighters are perhaps the weakest link in modern air power?
I think that's exactly right.
I think that's
No,
implicitly
let me,
coming through.
yeah, let me rephrase that. I suppose they are becoming. There's a long trend line here, I suppose,
Right.
and these automated systems have been getting better and better over the last 50 years. And gradually, crewed aircraft have become, as I said before, more difficult to make, slow to make, and countries can only afford very small numbers. Um, so therefore, if you like, crewed aircraft are pricing themselves out of the market, just like battleships did sort of years ago. So I think that it's a mindset change, that the dominance of crewed fighter aircraft in our minds, that we believe air power consists of, if you like, sort of crewed aircraft flown by brave and courageous crews, which of course is true. If we that view will have to shift and make room for, if you like, the more warfightingly sensible way of doing it, using uncrewed systems.
And when air forces around the world, when they viewed this, what you call a near peer air war, what lessons do you think they took from this conflict? I mean, you talked about the PL-15, for example, but what else could have been gleaned from this exchange?
Well, as I said, I think that certainly that you need to be aware that, as with all wars, your intelligence will probably have some holes in it on the first day. So, at the tactical level in particular, expect to be surprised, and have an agile force that can adapt to this suddenly changing world. You may have spent 10 years optimizing your force for a particular circumstance, but on the first day of the war, you may find that was a bad decision, and the world has changed. So I think that people perhaps are learning. It's relearning lessons about being about people's minds being flexible and adaptable. From a technical viewpoint, it's difficult to say. Now, it's certainly true that within India, there's a renewed interest on stealth platforms,
Right.
and I think probably an over focus upon stealth platforms. Good for certain circumstances, and the Israeli Air Force showed that during their war. But again, that was a very special war in many circumstances, and I think that you could overemphasize that would cause you problems next time round. The other interesting thing is, I think, is that it's interesting that that people in Europe are principally focusing on the Ukraine-Russia war,
Right.
and they're ignoring the Middle Eastern wars, if you like, as far as lessons learned. In the Middle East, they're focusing sort of mainly upon themselves with the Israel sort of Iran. And I think this particular the 4-day air war here has been ignored to a fair degree. Now, some of that being ignored is that it's because there was a lot of disinformation flying around, so no one was too sure what was actually happening.
Right.
But also, those other wars attracted a lot more media attention. This was very much an air war, sort of mostly at night, if you like. So people just saw flashes and bangs in in the darkness. But I think but I think at least that this is an air war worth a look at. Might have been short, but there seems some valid lessons in there. Hence why I wrote that post.
Dr. Layton, that was most insightful. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.